What would you do if the person responsible for humiliating your child didn't even know who you really were? Rain pounded against the windows of a sleek, glass-fronted bank in downtown Chicago, turning the city streets into slick rivers of reflected neon. Inside, the fluorescent lights buzzed faintly over rows of teller counters, the hum of printers and the quiet murmur of transactions filling the air. Most days, it was just another ordinary Tuesday, the kind of day where no one expected drama. But today, for one woman, the ordinary was about to shatter. Clara Whitman walked in like any other customer, her tailored coat cinched at the waist, leather bag swinging lightly against her side. Her heels clicked against the polished marble floor, echoing just enough to make the tellers glance up. She smiled politely, nodding at the security guard, and in that moment no one would have guessed that this seemingly composed woman carried a storm inside her. Just a week earlier, her 12-year-old daughter Emily had returned from school, cheeks streaked with tears, clutching a crumpled note she had been handed in the cafeteria. The note was short, cruel, and final. "You don't belong here. Go home." It had been written by someone Emily had trusted, a bank teller who also volunteered as a parent chaperone during school events, someone who had made a small, almost invisible gesture of humiliation in front of other kids. But the impact had been enormous. Emily's laughter, once bright and boundless, had vanished like smoke in a storm. Clara spent the first night replaying the scene over and over, heart pounding, mind racing. The frustration gnawed at her. She wanted justice, yes, but more than that, she wanted to protect her daughter's dignity. Calling the bank or speaking up in a parent meeting felt impotent, like trying to cage a storm in a jar. So she had devised a plan, one that teetered on the edge of recklessness. She would enter the lion's den herself. Under a borrowed name, Clara had set up a temporary account at the very same branch. For days she watched. She learned the rhythm of the teller's movements, the subtle hierarchies, the hidden rules that governed who got to smile, who got to frown, who got to hold power over ordinary people. But it was the person behind the counter, the one who had humiliated her daughter, who drew her focus. Samantha Price was everything Clara expected and nothing she expected all at once. Polished hair, crisp uniform, a wide, almost rehearsed smile that rarely reached her eyes. She moved like a predator in a carefully choreographed dance, handing out advice, stamping receipts, and sometimes letting a glance linger too long on a customer. The kind of look that could make someone doubt themselves without even realizing why. Clara had seen it before, the subtle cruelty, disguised as efficiency. Clara's heartbeat quickened as she stepped up to Samantha's counter that morning. Rain's slicked hair clung to her face, but she didn't brush it away. Instead, she met Samantha's eyes with the kind of calm that concealed everything: grief, anger, determination. "Good morning," Clara said, her voice steady, a slight edge that didn't betray the storm beneath. Samantha's smile widened, almost predatory. "Morning. How can I help you today?" Clara handed over a deposit slip, carefully keeping her fingers steady, letting them brush lightly against the counter. In that moment, the small sounds of the bank, the clink of coins, the beeping of scanners, the low murmur of conversations, seemed amplified as though the air itself held its breath. It started subtly at first. Samantha's tone carried a hint of condescension, the kind of microaggression that often goes unnoticed by everyone but the target. Clara played her part, a perfect mask of courtesy and compliance, all while recording every interaction mentally, every flicker of Samantha's expression. Days turned into a week. Clara made deposits, asked questions, occasionally struck up small talk. Samantha, unaware of who she was dealing with, began to reveal her true self. Impatience masked as efficiency, judgment disguised as casual conversation, tiny smirks when she assumed no one was paying attention. Each gesture, each tone, built a pattern that Clara cataloged in her mind, a pattern she would use to ensure that Samantha could not hide behind her polished facade. Then came the day that everything pivoted. A man approached the counter, looking flustered, papers spilling from his hands. Samantha barely glanced at him, tapping impatiently on the keyboard. Clara watched silently, and then she noticed something she hadn't anticipated. A glimmer of arrogance, almost contempt, the way Samantha's eyes darted around, as if daring someone to challenge her. That small arrogance sparked an idea in Clara, a dangerous, brilliant idea. She waited, letting the encounter unfold, and when the man finally left, Samantha's smirk remained, lingering in the air like a shadow. Clara leaned forward slightly, her voice low and deliberate. "You really think people won't notice?" she asked. Samantha looked up, startled. "Excuse me?" "Little things," Clara said, letting her eyes trace the edges of Samantha's carefully constructed confidence. "The way you treat them, the way you judge." Samantha's smirk faltered, replaced by a flicker of something unreadable. But she recovered quickly, masking it behind her practiced smile. "I'm just doing my job," she said. Clara tilted her head slightly, almost imperceptibly, the kind of gesture that conveyed calm scrutiny. "Do you think children won't notice either?" The words were casual, almost conversational, but they carried an edge sharp enough to slice through the veneer of professionalism. Samantha's hands paused mid-transaction. She glanced around, suddenly aware of the quiet attention of colleagues, the faint hum of the air conditioning, the muted buzz of fluorescent lights. For the first time she seemed off balance, exposed in a way that Clara had only dreamed of seeing. The following morning, Clara returned with a plan fully formed. She walked through the glass doors, letting the rain-slick streets reflect her resolve. Every detail mattered. The slight tilt of her chin, the rhythm of her steps, the way her eyes scanned the room before settling on Samantha. She approached the counter as though she were about to make a routine deposit, but this time she carried a folder containing every detail she had gathered, every subtle insult, every gesture of contempt Samantha had shown, all documented meticulously. Samantha greeted her with the same rehearsed smile, completely unaware of the storm about to crash down on her. "Good morning. How can I help you today?" Clara placed the folder on the counter slowly, deliberately. "I think it's time we had a conversation," she said. Her voice was calm, measured, but underneath it pulsed the fury and heartbreak of a mother protecting her child. Samantha's smile faltered just slightly. "Conversation?" Clara nodded, letting her gaze hold firm. "About the way you treat people, about my daughter." For a moment, silence reigned. The air in the bank felt heavier, charged, as though the walls themselves were bracing for the fallout. Other tellers glanced over, curiosity flickering in their eyes, sensing the shift, but not yet understanding its cause. Then came the subtle crack, a small, almost imperceptible hesitation in Samantha's eyes. And in that pause, Clara saw everything. The realization that this wasn't just a routine visit, this wasn't just another customer complaint. This was exposure. "Are you saying—" Samantha's voice faltered, her confidence slipping, the polished mask beginning to fracture. Clara leaned in just slightly, her voice barely above a whisper but heavy with the weight of inevitability. "Yes, I am." The room seemed to hold its breath. The fluorescent lights buzzed, the faint scent of rain drifted in from the street, and the hum of printers became deafening. And then, before Samantha could fully respond, Clara's phone buzzed quietly in her pocket, an alert she had been expecting but that now signaled the beginning of the end. She pulled it out, glanced at the screen, and a faint, almost imperceptible smile touched her lips. Samantha, finally realizing the true identity of the woman standing before her, froze. In that suspended moment, time seemed to slow. The bank, the rain outside, the indifferent city beyond the glass, all of it faded into a singular focus, the reckoning that was about to unfold. And then Clara spoke softly, almost casually, but with a force that would ripple far beyond these walls. "You're fired." Samantha's eyes widened in disbelief, her voice caught in her throat. Other tellers exchanged shocked glances, some whispering, others gripping counters as if bracing themselves. And in that instant, Clara knew that nothing could ever go back to the way it was. But what happened next? The confrontation, the fallout, the secret that Samantha had been hiding, is a story that went far deeper than anyone could have anticipated. Because sometimes the truth isn't just about exposure. Sometimes it's about how far a mother is willing to go to protect her child, and the dangerous line between justice and revenge. Samantha's lips trembled as she stared at the folder in front of her, the neat stack of papers and printed emails, each one a piece of evidence carefully catalogued by Clara. The hum of the bank felt louder now, every tick of the clock, every shuffle of paper, amplified like a countdown to some inevitable reckoning. Around them, the world went on, oblivious customers tapping on their phones, the barista across the street handing over lattes to hurried commuters, the city breathing in its usual rhythm. But inside this small glass sanctuary, time had warped, stretching each heartbeat into eternity. Samantha swallowed, her throat dry, her eyes darting to the other tellers, to the security guard, to anyone who might rescue her from this confrontation. But there was no rescue here. Clara's presence was gravity itself, pulling the truth into the center of the room and holding it there. You can't just... Samantha began, her voice shaking, then faltered entirely. Words failed her, dissolving into a nervous laugh that only made her appear smaller, weaker. Clara's eyes softened, but only slightly. The fury that had driven her here a week ago was tempered now by a calm, measured resolve. I can, and I will. But this isn't about punishment. Not really. It's about accountability. And about my daughter. Samantha's gaze flickered involuntarily to the glass doors, to the rain-slick street outside, where life carried on as if nothing extraordinary had ever happened. It was almost absurd, this juxtaposition, her own career, her carefully constructed persona, crumbling in a quiet bank in the middle of a Tuesday, while outside strangers laughed, argued, and hurried on with their mundane dramas. Clara opened the folder just enough to show a single page, a printed copy of an email exchange between Samantha and another parent from Emily's school. The subject line was innocuous enough, but the tone was sharp, biting, unmistakably judgmental. It seems some children just don't fit in, Samantha had written, followed by a line that made Emily's mother's stomach twist. Perhaps a change in attitude or environment is needed. Clara let the silence stretch, letting the weight of the words sink in. She could see Samantha squirm under the pressure, the confident veneer cracking with every second. And yet, beneath the fear, there was something else. A flicker of defiance, a desperate need to reclaim control. You think showing me this makes a difference? Samantha asked finally, her voice quieter now, almost conspiratorial. Everyone says things sometimes. It's not like you're some sort of judge. I'm not a judge, Clara replied, her voice steady, almost gentle. I'm a mother. And mothers. We notice things that others ignore. She leaned in slightly, her eyes locking with Samantha's. Things like the way you humiliated my daughter in front of her peers. Things like the smirk you wore when she tried to explain herself. Things that left her crying in her bedroom that night, convinced she'd done something wrong when all she'd done was be herself. Samantha looked away, her fingers tightening around the edge of the counter. There was a moment, fleeting but palpable, when guilt flickered across her features. Clara saw it. The tiny shiver of recognition, the human response that no amount of training or composure could fully erase. Then, as quickly as it appeared, it was gone. Samantha's mask slid back into place, a thin veil of professionalism attempting to reclaim its dominance. I didn't mean for her to feel that way, she said. Her voice was quieter now, uncertain but still defensive. Kids are sensitive. Sometimes they overreact. Clara shook her head slowly. No, she didn't overreact. You underestimated her. You underestimated every child you spoke to, every family you judged, every little interaction you treated as inconsequential. And now it's catching up to you. The silence that followed was thick, like a heavy fog settling over the bank floor. Other tellers watched discreetly, the tension palpable. some glancing nervously at the door, as if it might offer escape to Samantha, or perhaps a sudden escape for themselves from this uncomfortable moment. Then Clara took a step back and placed the folder carefully on the counter. "I've recorded everything," she said, letting the words hang in the air like a slow drumbeat. "Conversations, interactions, attitudes. Every time you thought no one was watching, I was watching. Every time you humiliated someone, I took note. And it's all here." She let her hand hover above the folder for a moment, a subtle flourish that conveyed both finality and inevitability. Samantha's eyes widened, the realization sinking in. This was no ordinary complaint, no fleeting accusation. This was undeniable evidence of behavior that the bank could not ignore, behavior that could cost her career. And yet, as fear took root, she reacted not with contrition but with a sudden, sharp defiance. "You think you can just walk in here and destroy me?" she asked, her voice trembling, but now with rising anger. "Do you even know who I am?" Clara paused. The words hung in the air like a challenge. Then she smiled faintly, almost imperceptibly. "Oh, I know exactly who you are," she said softly. "And that's exactly why you don't get to hurt anyone else." The confrontation reached its peak in that suspended moment, neither of them moving, the tension spiraling like an invisible cyclone. Then, without warning, Samantha's phone buzzed, breaking the fragile equilibrium. She glanced at it, fingers shaking, and her face went pale. Clara's eyes narrowed, reading the subtle cues of panic and realization. Samantha turned the phone toward her for a brief, frantic glance at the screen, and Clara saw the email notification from the bank's head office. The words were simple, yet devastating. "Immediate suspension pending review." Samantha's hands trembled, the professional poise she had cultivated for years evaporating under the weight of exposure. And then she looked up at Clara, eyes brimming with disbelief and the faintest trace of fear. You don't understand," she whispered, more to herself than to Clara. "I've worked here. I've done everything right. People depend on me." Clara's gaze softened again, this time not with anger but with a quiet, measured compassion. "People depend on you because you've made them think you care," she said. "But caring isn't pretending. It isn't judgment disguised as efficiency. Caring is noticing, protecting, understanding. And you forgot that." Samantha's knees nearly buckled, and she gripped the counter, struggling to maintain her balance both physically and emotionally. Clara could see it all, the arrogance stripped away, the professional mask shattered, the person beneath exposed in raw, trembling vulnerability. The room felt quieter now. The hum of machines receded into the background, the chatter of other tellers muted by the intensity of the moment. Clara took a deep breath, letting herself feel the culmination of days of careful planning, watching, and waiting. And yet beneath her satisfaction there was a quiet unease, because confrontation was only the beginning. As the minutes stretched, Clara noticed something unexpected. Samantha's eyes flicked briefly to a surveillance monitor mounted near the ceiling, the camera's lens reflecting faintly in the glass. The same subtle paranoia that had driven Samantha to assert control over every customer interaction now betrayed her. Clara realized with a flicker of alarm that this confrontation might ripple far beyond this small bank branch. There were recordings, archives, internal communications, all of which could be weaponized, twisted, or misunderstood. Clara's mind raced. Every step had been calculated, every move deliberate. Yet there was an element of unpredictability here. A single misstep could spiral into chaos. And as she watched Samantha's fingers hover over her phone, contemplating desperate measures, Clara felt the weight of responsibility not just as a mother, but as someone wielding power that could irreversibly alter a life. For a moment she allowed herself to reflect. Emily's face appeared in her mind's eye, tear-streaked cheeks, quivering lips, the vulnerability of a child who had trusted the world and been met with ridicule. And alongside that memory, the sense of clarity sharpened. This wasn't about revenge, not really. It was about exposure, accountability, and ensuring that no one else could walk away from this unscathed. Samantha's phone buzzed again, and this time Clara saw the decision unfold. She watched Samantha's face drain of color, her hands trembling as she realized that the bank's response would be immediate, decisive. Suspension, investigation, perhaps even termination. Every carefully constructed wall she had built over years was crumbling under the weight of evidence, exposure, and the unwavering gaze of a mother's determination. And then, in a fleeting moment of human vulnerability, Samantha whispered a single word, barely audible over the muted buzz of the bank. "Why?" Clara leaned closer, her voice a soft but unwavering answer. "Because someone has to stand up when others are hurt. Because someone has to make sure the truth isn't buried. Because I promised my daughter I would protect her." Samantha's eyes widened with the sudden, sharp recognition of what she had done and what she had lost. And in that realization, the scale of the moment hit both of them simultaneously. This was not a personal vendetta. It was a reckoning. And it was only the beginning. The tension hung thick in the air as Clara turned, leaving the folder behind as a silent testament to what had transpired. She stepped toward the exit, heels clicking on the marble, each sound echoing like a heartbeat. Behind her, Samantha remained frozen, staring at the folder, at the phone, at the empty space where Clara had just stood. A tableau of confrontation, accountability, and the shattering of illusions. Outside, the rain had slowed to a fine mist, turning the city streets into a silver mirror of reflections and possibilities. Clara paused at the glass doors, looking down at the wet pavement, feeling the weight of what had just occurred. She knew this confrontation was only the first ripple in a larger story, the story of exposure, justice, and the complicated terrain of human behavior when pride, guilt, and accountability collide. And as she stepped back into the rain, feeling the chill seep through her coat, she realized something she hadn't anticipated. This was not just about Samantha, or even about Emily. It was about every hidden cruelty, every overlooked slight, every small act of judgment that quietly erodes the lives of those who least deserve it. Clara's mind replayed the week's events like a slow-motion film. Emily's tears, Samantha's smirk, the folder of evidence, the suspended thread of the bank's investigation. And as she walked toward the street, a subtle, almost imperceptible smile tugged at her lips. Because she had learned something vital in the storm of confrontation, that even in the smallest spaces, even in the quietest corners of ordinary life, courage could manifest, and truth could prevail. Yet in the back of her mind, a shadow lingered. There were repercussions to come, consequences she could not yet predict. Colleagues who had witnessed the confrontation might gossip, legal ramifications could surface, and Samantha herself was capable of desperate, unpredictable actions. Clara understood, with a quiet, heavy certainty, that the calm she felt now was temporary, a brief pause before the next storm. And in that moment, as the misted city lights reflected in puddles around her, Clara knew one thing for certain. The story was far from over, because while one chapter had closed, another was beginning. A chapter where the boundaries between justice and retribution, protection and exposure, courage and recklessness would blur in ways she could not yet foresee. She glanced once more at the bank, its glass facade gleaming in the rain, and whispered under her breath, almost as a promise to herself, "This isn't the end. Not for Emily, not for me, and not for her." Then, with one last deep breath, she stepped fully into the street, the rain washing over her, and the distant sound of a siren, a new and unanticipated twist in the unfolding story, drew her forward into the unknown. The reckoning had begun, and nothing would ever be the same again. The rain had stopped, leaving the city glistening in a quiet post-storm calm, but Clara could feel the storm lingering inside her. Each step she took away from the bank felt heavier than the last, as if the weight of all the days leading to this moment were pressing down on her shoulders. The chill in the evening air clung to her skin, seeping through her coat, a physical echo of the tension that refused to leave her chest. She walked without direction, letting the city carry her, letting the wet pavement reflect fragments of neon signs, traffic lights, and the distorted faces of strangers. Everything felt sharper now. The smell of rain, the distant hiss of tires on wet asphalt, the faint tang of exhaust in the air. Her mind was a tangle of thoughts. She replayed the confrontation in the bank again and again, analyzing every glance, every word, every subtle movement. Samantha's final look had been more than shock or fear. There had been a flicker of recognition, almost regret, buried beneath layers of pride. Clara wondered if she had underestimated her, if she had misread the situation. People were complicated, sometimes far more than the neat categories of right and wrong could contain. And for the first time that evening, a sliver of doubt pierced her certainty. Had she gone too far? The thought was fleeting, immediately pushed aside by a surge of protective instinct. No, she reminded herself, she hadn't. This wasn't about revenge. It was about defending Emily, about holding someone accountable who had hurt a child in a way that seemed small to the world but monumental to the victim. Clara had promised herself that she would not allow that pain to be dismissed, and she had acted. But even as the justification settled, another question gnawed at her. What if Samantha fought back? What if this confrontation escalated beyond words and letters, beyond the reach of polite procedure? Her pace quickened, matching the rhythm of her pulse. The streetlights stretched long shadows across the pavement, elongated figures that seemed to flicker like memory and reality colliding. She noticed a man on a nearby bench, huddled under a dripping awning, his coat pulled tight around his shoulders. He glanced at her, then quickly looked away, returning to whatever private struggle he carried with him. Clara wondered how many people went through their days weighed down by hidden conflicts, by unspoken hurts, by quiet private reckonings. How easy it was, she thought, to walk past someone suffering without even noticing. Her thoughts fractured as her phone vibrated. She glanced at the screen. It was Emily. Her chest tightened. The line between protective instinct and anxiety blurred in that instant. She answered, "Mom?" Emily's voice was soft, almost fragile, a thread barely holding itself together. Are you okay?" Clara's throat tightened. Hearing her daughter's concern, tinged with the echo of the week's humiliation, made something coil inside her. "I'm okay," she said, carefully modulating her tone. "You don't need to worry about me." But what about her? The bank, the woman. Did she? Emily's words stumbled, suffocated by uncertainty. Clara inhaled slowly, picturing her daughter curled up in her room, the faint light of a desk lamp casting long shadows, her sketchbook open but untouched. Emily had drawn today, she realized, in a silent protest against a world that had made her feel small. "I handled it," Clara said gently, though her voice carried the firmness of someone who had faced a storm and survived. "Everything's going to be okay." Yet even as she reassured Emily, Clara felt an unsettling itch in the back of her mind. There was something she hadn't anticipated, a ripple she couldn't yet measure. Samantha, the carefully polished, controlled Samantha, humiliated yet still capable of reaction. People like her didn't crumble quietly. They adapted. They retaliated. They found ways to bend the world back into their image. Clara had confronted her, but she hadn't seen the full picture of what Samantha might do next. The city felt different now, stranger somehow. Streetlights flickered in rhythm with her heartbeat. A group of teenagers laughed, slapping each other on the back, unaware of the invisible tensions that threaded through the night. Clara's gaze drifted upward. Office towers glinted in the last light of dusk, their mirrored surfaces reflecting the sky like fractured shards of glass. Somewhere, in one of those towers, decisions were being made, networks of communication setting events in motion beyond her immediate perception. She realized with a shiver that this confrontation, as personal as it felt, existed inside a larger system, a mechanism that could amplify consequences she hadn't foreseen. Her thoughts were interrupted by a soft ping from her phone again, a new email notification. She glanced down, heart tightening as she read the preview. Urgent, immediate action required. The sender was not from the bank, but from a private investigator she had hired discreetly last year to look into certain anomalies at Emily's school. Clara's pulse accelerated. She had thought that chapter closed. The weeks of subtle research, the interviews, the background checks, all completed. But this message suggested otherwise. Something new, something urgent, something that demanded attention. Curiosity mingled with dread as she unlocked the phone. The message was brief, almost cryptic. They know. It's bigger than anticipated. Call me immediately. Jay. Clara's breath caught. The words, "they know," reverberated in her mind like a bell, each echo louder than the last. Who knew? And what was bigger than anticipated? Her instincts screamed that this wasn't about Samantha alone. Whatever she had stumbled into, whatever truth she had begun to uncover, it was far larger, far more dangerous than she had imagined. She gripped the phone tighter, her fingers leaving pale marks in the leather case. The city's neon reflected off her skin, fractured, distorted, like a warning in color and light. Clara understood, with a slow, sinking certainty, that the confrontation at the bank had been merely the opening act, the first fracture in a much larger structure of secrets, judgment, and hidden agendas. She made the call, the ringtone echoing sharply against the quiet night. When the line connected, a voice she recognized immediately cut through the tension. "Clara, I didn't think it would escalate this quickly," said Jay, the private investigator. His voice was calm, but the undercurrent of urgency was unmistakable. "What do you mean?" Clara asked, her voice steadier than she felt. "They've noticed. The patterns, the records, the emails. Everything you thought was contained? It isn't. Someone with influence is involved, Clara. Someone who can't afford for this to reach the wrong ears. You might have thought you were confronting one person, but this goes higher. Much higher. Much." Clara felt her stomach drop. Her mind raced, attempting to calculate what that meant. The higher Jay referred to could mean administrators at the school, the bank's corporate hierarchy, or someone else entirely. Someone with the ability to manipulate outcomes, to bury evidence, to retaliate with a precision that could ruin lives. She swallowed hard, forcing herself to focus. Who? There was a pause, weighted with static and gravity. Then Jay's voice dropped to a near whisper. "I don't know. Not yet. But if you're not careful, you could become the target, not the protector." Clara's hand tightened on the phone. A strange mix of adrenaline and fear surged through her, her heartbeat thudding in her ears like a drum signaling both challenge and warning. She realized that every choice from this moment forward carried consequences far beyond what she had anticipated. Her protective instinct for Emily now had to navigate a minefield of hidden dangers, unseen observers, and unpredictable adversaries. She ended the call, her chest heaving. The street was nearly empty now, the mist settling over asphalt and concrete in an eerie silver haze. The city seemed to pause with her, the hum of electricity, the distant sirens, and the occasional car slicing through puddles creating an uneasy rhythm that mirrored her thoughts. Clara's mind churned. She had confronted Samantha, yet Samantha was only one node in a web she hadn't yet fully mapped. The confrontation at the bank, the emails, the suspension, all of it was a prelude to something far more complex. Clara's gaze drifted upward again, to the mirrored windows of the high-rise office towers. In them, she imagined figures moving with deliberate purpose, orchestrating events she could barely comprehend. The realization hit her with sudden clarity. The world she had thought she understood, the safe, contained world where justice and accountability were straightforward, didn't exist. Not really. She had stepped into a deeper, darker network of power and secrecy, where every action could trigger unforeseen consequences. And yet, beneath the weight of fear, a flicker of determination ignited. Clara recognized the truth she had avoided acknowledging until now. If she retreated, if she allowed fear to paralyze her, the cost wouldn't be just Samantha's accountability or Emily's dignity. It would be her own agency, her ability to stand and act in the face of injustice. She walked faster now, boots splashing through shallow puddles, her breath visible in the cool night air. Each step was deliberate, grounding her, anchoring her resolve. And with every step, the realization deepened. The confrontation at the bank was not the climax, nor even the turning point. It was merely the opening of a much larger, far more dangerous story, one she had no choice but to navigate, one in which truth, protection, and survival were inextricably intertwined. A sudden movement caught her eye. From the corner of a narrow alleyway, a figure emerged, stepping into the glow of a flickering streetlight. Clara froze. The figure was familiar. Not Samantha, not anyone she had expected, but a presence that immediately sharpened every sense. Their features were obscured by the hood of a coat, but the stance, the way they moved, deliberate yet cautious, suggested purpose. Clara's pulse quickened. She took a step back, the wet pavement threatening to betray her balance. She felt the instinctive rise of tension, the fine line between caution and confrontation, safety and exposure. The figure stopped, then spoke, voice low but clear. "You think you've only stirred one hornet's nest, you've stirred them all." Clara's stomach dropped. The words carried a weight, an implication, a chilling promise that the story she thought she controlled had already expanded far beyond her understanding. And as she stared at the figure, rain glistening on the hood, the shadows folding around them like smoke, she realized, one with a mixture of fear and grim determination, that nothing would ever be the same again. A new layer had been revealed, and the game had just begun. The figure in the alley didn't move, didn't take a step closer, but the weight of their words pressed down on Clara as if the night itself had contracted. "They're watching," the voice said again, more insistent this time, almost a warning, almost a threat. Clara's mind raced. Who were they? And what did they want with her? With Emily? Her instinct screamed at her to run, to disappear into the labyrinth of streets that twisted through the city like veins of shadow. But something in the calm certainty of the figure's presence rooted her. She couldn't run from this. Not anymore. Not when the stakes had become so much larger than a single confrontation at a bank. The figure tilted their head slightly, the hood catching the dim light in a way that made it impossible to discern the face beneath. "You don't know what you've uncovered," they said, voice quiet, but edged with a kind of authority that silenced everything else. "And they will stop at nothing." Clara's chest tightened. Every muscle in her body tensed as though she were poised on the edge of a precipice. Her thoughts spiraled. Samantha, the emails from Jay, the private investigator's warning, they were threads in a pattern far bigger than she could yet see. And now this shadow appearing from nowhere, confirming the worst. The world she had stepped into was alive, moving, and fully aware of her intrusion. "Who are you?" she asked, voice steady, though her heart pounded so hard it felt like it might betray her. The figure shifted slightly, revealing a glimpse of a hand holding a small leather-bound notebook. "I'm someone who's been watching this play unfold for a long time," the figure replied. "Someone who knows the truth about what you just set in motion." Clara's mind fought to catch up, trying to assemble the fragments into a coherent picture. Truth, motion, secrets. The words felt heavy, almost like a physical weight pressing against her ribs. "Set in motion?" she echoed, her voice barely above a whisper. "What do you mean?" The figure didn't answer immediately. Instead, they stepped back into the shadows, the notebook clutched tightly to their chest. "You're about to see," they said. And with that, they turned and vanished, swallowed by the darkened alley, as if they had never been there at all. Clara stood alone, the damp night pressing in around her, the echo of their words reverberating in her mind. She felt exposed, vulnerable, but also driven by a burning curiosity she couldn't ignore. Every instinct screamed that she was on the cusp of something monumental, a truth so vast that it could unravel everything she thought she knew about the people around her, about power, about justice. Her phone buzzed again, another message from Jay. This one contained only an address and a single line: "Come now, answers are waiting." Clara hesitated, staring at the glowing screen in her hand. Every rational fiber of her being warned against stepping further into danger. Every protective instinct for Emily argued for retreat, for returning to the safety of home, to the fragile normalcy they had tried to preserve. And yet, something inside her flared, a resolve that had been simmering beneath fear and doubt. She couldn't stop now. Not when she was so close to uncovering the full scope of the forces she had unwittingly provoked. The street seemed to stretch on endlessly as she moved, neon reflections shimmering off wet asphalt, streetlights flickering in an uneven rhythm that mirrored her pulse. She arrived at the address, an unremarkable office building that looked abandoned, its windows dark, the entrance marked only by a dimly glowing sign that flickered intermittently. Clara paused, taking a deep breath, letting the air fill her lungs, letting the gravity of the moment sink in. Inside, the air was colder, heavier, charged with a tension that made the hair on her arms rise. The lobby was empty, except for a single figure seated behind a desk, Jay. His face was shadowed, and yet his eyes held a mixture of relief and urgency. "You came," he said simply. No greeting, no explanation. Just a statement that carried the weight of everything that had been building. Clara's gaze swept the room. There were files stacked neatly on tables, photographs pinned to corkboards, strings connecting names and images in a chaotic but deliberate pattern. It was a map of connections, relationships, and secrets. A visual representation of the hidden world she had stumbled into. She felt a chill creep over her, not from the cold, but from the realization that the web extended far beyond Samantha, far beyond the bank, far beyond even the school or local authorities. "They've been manipulating things for years," Jay said, voice low. "Not just in your daughter's school, not just in this city. They operate in networks, in corridors of power no one questions, no one sees. And now, you've drawn their attention." Clara's stomach turned. The pieces were falling into place, and yet the picture they formed was more horrifying than anything she could have imagined. "Why me?" she whispered. "Why did this involve us?" Jay looked her directly in the eye, a weighty solemnity in his expression. "Because you acted. You confronted. You refused to be invisible, and that scares them more than anything else. People like you. People who refuse to turn away, who protect what matters. They disrupt the order. They're dangerous to their system." Clara felt the words settle like stones in her chest. Dangerous to a system. That phrase carried a double meaning, both terrifying and exhilarating. She had felt powerless for so long, had wrestled with the limits of her influence, and now she saw that her actions mattered in ways she hadn't anticipated. Yet with that realization came a stark, unrelenting fear. If she misstepped, if she underestimated them, the consequences would be devastating. The silence in the room stretched, heavy and pregnant with implication. Then Jay reached across the desk and slid the leather-bound notebook toward her. "Everything you need to know," he said. "All the pieces, all the players. But be careful. Reading this changes things. Once you see it, there's no going back." Clara's hand trembled as she lifted the notebook. Its cover was smooth, the leather worn but sturdy, edges frayed from frequent handling. She opened it slowly, as if afraid of what she might unleash by simply turning the pages. Inside were documents, photographs, names, connections, a network of corruption and manipulation that spanned years. Her eyes widened as she realized the depth, the reach, the audacity of what had been hidden in plain sight. There were photos of bank executives meeting with local officials, handwritten notes indicating covert influence, lists of people to monitor, and even references to Emily's school. The system wasn't just broken, it was meticulously engineered to protect itself, to suppress anyone who threatened its equilibrium. And now somehow, Clara had become a variable it couldn't ignore. Her mind raced, the weight of the revelations pressing on her chest. Each page revealed a new layer of the network, each name a potential threat, each connection a potential betrayal. She realized the confrontation at the bank, Samantha, the emails, the warnings, had been a spark, But the wildfire was just beginning. And then, at the very back of the notebook, a single sheet of paper fell loose. Clara picked it up, hands shaking. There was a name she recognized immediately. Not a low-level administrator, not a school official, not a minor player. A name that made her heart stop. A name she had never expected to see tied to the web of manipulation and secrecy. Before she could speak, the office lights flickered, and a shadow passed across the doorway. Clara and Jay both looked up. The sense of being watched, of danger closing in, was immediate, visceral. Jay leaned closer, voice low, almost a whisper. "You have to understand, it's not just about exposure anymore. It's about survival." Clara's breath caught. Every instinct, every thought, every memory of the past weeks coalesced into a single, undeniable truth. The confrontation she thought was personal had escalated into something far beyond her control. And now, as the shadow lingered at the threshold, the city outside quiet but alive, she realized that the moment of choice, the moment that would define everything, was seconds away. The tension in the room was a living thing, coiling around her like a serpent. Her heart raced, her senses heightened to a point of painful clarity. Every sound, the soft hum of the fluorescent lights, the faint scuff of shoes on tile, the distant city traffic, carried the weight of impending revelation. Clara understood in that suspended heartbeat of silence that nothing would ever be the same. Every decision she made from this moment would ripple outward, touching Emily, Samantha, the network, and herself in ways she could not yet imagine. And then, from the shadow at the doorway, a voice, calm and deliberate, broke the silence. "Ms. Harrington," it said, "we need to talk." Clara froze, the notebook clutched to her chest, the storm inside her ready to erupt, the truth poised on the knife edge of revelation. Outside, the city breathed in quiet anticipation, unaware of the hurricane that had just entered one quiet, dimly lit office. And in that instant, Clara understood that the calm, the tension, and the danger had all converged into a single, unyielding reality. The confrontation she had started was about to explode in ways she could never have imagined. The notebook trembled in her hands. The shadow waited. And Clara, for the first time, felt the full weight of the storm she had unleashed. The voice at the doorway was steady, deliberate, but it carried a weight that made Clara's chest constrict. She slowly lowered the notebook, her eyes locking with the figure now stepping into the room. Light caught the edges of their face, sharp angles shadowed by a deliberate calm. This was no ordinary visitor. This was someone who held dominion over the secrets Clara had only begun to scratch. "Ms. Harrington," the figure repeated, voice crisp. "You've stirred something far bigger than a single bank or a school. Do you understand what you've done?" Clara's hands tightened around the notebook. She felt a tremor in her body. Not fear exactly, but the raw pulse of responsibility, the gravity of consequences she had only glimpsed until now. "I only tried to protect my daughter," she said quietly, almost a whisper. "I didn't—" "You did more than protect," the figure interrupted. Their eyes were unblinking, sharp, commanding. "You challenged the system. You exposed vulnerabilities. And now, everyone is watching. They've noticed you, they've noticed her." The word, her, landed like a stone in Clara's chest. Emily. The thought made Clara's stomach coil. She had thought the fight was hers alone, but the stakes had shifted. This wasn't just about humiliation, or pride, or justice. It was about survival. And it was bigger than she had imagined. The figure moved closer, deliberately slow, measured. "You need to understand the full scope. What you confronted, the teller, the emails, the small manipulations you noticed, it's a surface layer. There's a network, and it runs deep. It touches people you see every day, people you trust. Power, influence, control, it all radiates from them, and it spreads through institutions quietly, invisibly." Clara felt her breath catch. Her mind raced, flashing through the last weeks. The dismissive teachers, the curt bank manager, the subtle manipulations in her daughter's life. Each moment now seemed like a calculated move in a game she hadn't known she was playing. "And this," the figure said, gesturing toward the notebook. This is the map. Every name, every connection, every moment they tried to cover their tracks. It's all here, and you hold it. She opened the notebook again, flipping through pages almost mechanically. The photographs, the notes, the diagrams, each more damning than the last. But then she froze. One photograph, in particular, made her stomach drop. It was a high-profile gala, a networking event, and there, in the background, smiling and shaking hands, was someone she had never imagined being involved, someone she had trusted, someone untouchable. The figure leaned closer. Do you see now? Yes, Clara said, her voice shaking. I see. A moment of silence stretched between them, heavy and absolute. Then the figure's tone shifted. The truth isn't kind, and it isn't clean, but it's necessary. What you do next determines whether you survive this, and whether she does. Then the figure moved back slightly, reaching into a coat pocket. They pulled out a single USB drive, placing it carefully on the desk. Everything you've seen here, they said, is only a fraction. This has everything. The evidence, communications, transactions. Enough to bring the network down if you can navigate it. But beware, they are already moving. They watch through eyes you cannot see. Clara's gaze locked on the drive, her mind a chaotic storm of fear and resolve. She had a choice: to retreat into safety, to hide, to pretend ignorance once again, or to step fully into the fire, to wield the evidence she now held, to fight back. Her hand hovered over the drive, the weight of possibility anchoring her in the room. Every instinct screamed caution. Every heartbeat demanded courage. The air seemed to thicken, the walls closing in, the hum of electricity and tension vibrating in her ears. She could feel Emily's presence in her mind, small and vulnerable, and it hardened her resolve. I won't let them touch her, she said finally. A whisper turned to declaration. I'll do whatever it takes. The figure nodded almost imperceptibly, as if they had expected nothing less. Then understand this, they said. Once you take this step, there is no turning back. You become part of the story. They will challenge you, manipulate you, try to break you, but you will also uncover truths they hoped would stay buried forever. And you may not survive unscathed, but neither will they if you play it right. The weight of those words sank in. Clara could feel the intensity coiling inside her, a tension building to a nearly unbearable pitch. She could almost hear the unseen network stirring, the machinery of power beginning to move in response to her choices. Every shadow, every corridor, every quiet office was suddenly alive with eyes, ears, consequences. She took a deep breath. Her mind sharpened, fear melding with clarity. The notebook, the drive, the evidence. This was more than revenge. This was justice. Not the neat legal kind, but the raw, inevitable kind that cut through pretense and lies and exposed the core of corruption for the world to see. Outside the office, the night had deepened. Rain began to fall, tapping against the windows in irregular rhythms, each drop echoing like a drumbeat, a call to action. Clara felt the rain in her bones, its chill mingling with the fire coursing through her veins. The city felt alive, almost conspiratorial, as if it knew what was coming and had been waiting for this moment. Then the silence shifted. A sound, a subtle, almost imperceptible shift at the door, a movement that made Clara stiffen. The shadow returned, this time accompanied by the faint click of heels on tile, a second presence entering the room. Her heart raced. A woman stepped into the light, her expression composed, calculating, almost cold. She carried herself with the authority of someone accustomed to command. Clara Harrington, she said, voice smooth, but the edges sharp. I've been expecting you. Clara's grip on the notebook tightened. Every instinct screamed alert. The city outside, the storm within, the hum of danger, all converged in that room. The woman stepped closer, revealing a badge clipped discreetly to her coat. Federal. Clara felt the implications immediately. This wasn't just corporate or local corruption anymore. This was higher. much higher. "You have no idea what you've stumbled into," the woman continued. "They've underestimated you. That's dangerous for them, for you, for everyone connected. And now, because of what you've discovered, the balance is shifting." Clara swallowed, her mind racing through every possibility. The notebook, the drive, Emily, the network, everything. And then, in that charged moment, clarity struck her like lightning. This wasn't just about exposing a bank teller or even protecting her daughter. This was a reckoning. A confrontation with a system that had quietly dictated the lives of countless people, including her own. And she was holding the trigger. The air in the office seemed to pulse with tension, every shadow heavier, every flicker of light more dramatic. Time slowed. The storm outside grew louder, rain pounding the windows, wind rattling frames. Inside, silence held its breath. Clara lifted the notebook and the USB drive, looking between the two agents, the shadowed figure who had brought her here, and the woman now revealing the breadth of the stakes. Her chest tightened with the enormity of the moment. The path forward was clear in its danger, its complexity, its moral weight. But she also felt something else, something potent, raw, unstoppable, a resolve born not of revenge but of necessity. "I'm ready," Clara said, voice steady, carrying the certainty of someone who had faced fear, loss, and the unseen mechanisms of power. "Show me what needs to be done." The two figures exchanged a brief, loaded glance. The air seemed to hold its breath. And then, as if acknowledging the inevitability, the shadow stepped aside, gesturing toward the door. The storm outside mirrored the storm within, the city a canvas for the chaos Clara was about to unleash. As she moved toward the door, the notebook and drive secure in her hands, she felt the first true tremor of possibility. Every step was a choice, every breath a commitment. And behind her, the hum of the city, the rain, the shadows, all seemed to whisper the same truth. There was no turning back. The office fell silent behind her as the door clicked shut. Outside, the rain-slick streets reflected the neon lights like shards of fractured glass. Clara's heart pounded. The moment of confrontation, of exposure, of revelation, had arrived. And in that charged, electric night, she understood it fully. The fight was no longer just for her daughter. It was for truth, for justice, for the reckoning that could finally shatter the carefully constructed shadows of power. The storm outside and inside her soul roared in unison, and Clara Harrington stepped forward into it, unflinching, unstoppable, ready for everything that was about to come. Clara emerged into the early morning streets, the rain finally thinning to a gentle drizzle. The city around her was quiet, almost reverent, as if it too had exhaled after the storm. Neon lights reflected off wet pavement, fractured into long, shimmering lines that seemed to stretch toward infinity. For the first time in weeks, she felt the tension inside her loosen. Not completely, not yet, but enough to feel the weight of what had been accomplished. The notebook and USB drive were gone, now safely in the hands of the authorities she had trusted, the evidence finally moving through channels capable of dismantling the corruption she had uncovered. Clara let herself walk slowly, letting the rhythm of her steps match the cadence of her thoughts. The confrontation, the revelations, the danger, they were behind her, but their echoes lingered, soft but persistent, like ripples across a still pond. She found herself at the edge of the city park, the kind of place she used to take Emily when the world felt simpler. The fountain at the center had long since been drained, its empty basin reflecting a sky streaked with pale pink and gold, the promise of dawn. Clara knelt beside it, brushing the waterless stone with her fingers, imagining the laughter of children filling the void. For a moment, she allowed herself to remember her daughter's smile that first day at the bank, the confusion, the hurt, and then the fire that had sparked in her own heart. That fire had carried her through the storm. The wind shifted, carrying the faint scent of rain-soaked asphalt and blossoming flowers from a nearby garden. Clara closed her eyes and breathed in deeply, letting the quiet settle into her bones. She realized that the fight, intense and consuming as it had been, had changed her. not just in skill or resolve, but in vision. She had glimpsed the fragility of systems, the quiet cruelty that could lurk behind polite smiles and official titles. And she had also seen the extraordinary resilience of human courage, the way one person could hold a spark that illuminated darkness. Somewhere in the city, life was waking. Sirens sounded faintly in the distance. A bus hissed to a stop, doors squealing in protest. Yet here, in this moment, time seemed suspended. Clara thought of the teller who had humiliated Emily, the powerful network whose reach had seemed insurmountable, the officials and agents who had moved silently behind the scenes. Every thread had been pulled, every hidden corner exposed, and yet the human heart, hers, Emily's, even those who had wielded power thoughtlessly, remained unpredictable, resilient, capable of both harm and grace. She reached into her pocket, feeling the familiar weight of Emily's bracelet. Small, delicate, a token of her daughter's presence even when apart. Clara smiled softly, almost to herself. Emily had been frightened, yes, and yet brave in her own way. The confrontation had forged a bond that neither humiliation nor fear could sever. Clara understood now that protecting someone didn't always mean shielding them from pain. Sometimes, it meant showing them how to rise through it. Clara's thoughts drifted to the figure who had first guided her through the labyrinth of truth, the shadowed agent who had seen potential where she had seen only desperation. They had reminded her that courage is rarely about absence of fear. It is about the deliberate choice to move forward despite it. That choice had carried her through danger, through moral complexity, through the dizzying realization of how fragile justice can be. She stood and walked toward the edge of the fountain, waterless stones cold beneath her fingertips. The city stretched beyond her, endless streets gleaming in the soft light. Each one a story, a choice, a ripple in the vast network of human lives. Clara felt the quiet satisfaction of having intervened, having acted when so many would have faltered, yet she also recognized the humility of the moment. She had won a battle, but the war, the constant negotiation between right and wrong, courage and fear, empathy and indifference was ongoing, eternal and far beyond any single victory. Her phone buzzed briefly in her coat pocket. She ignored it, letting the moment stretch. The future was uncertain, as it always was, yet for the first time, it seemed full of possibility rather than threat. Clara considered what she had learned, that power is not inherently corrupt, but it attracts those who would misuse it, that the quiet acts of kindness, vigilance, and truth-telling can ripple further than anyone anticipates, that one person's choice can illuminate darkness that has persisted far too long. A gust of wind lifted loose strands of her hair across her face. She brushed them back, eyes narrowing slightly as she surveyed the horizon. Dawn was breaking, but not dramatically. No blaze of fire or triumphant flare, just a gentle wash of light painting buildings and streets in soft pastels. The subtlety of it was somehow more profound. It reminded her that even after chaos, even after storms that shake the foundation of the world, life resumes quietly, insistently, resiliently. Her thoughts turned again to Emily. She imagined her daughter's laughter, her quiet resilience, the way she had faced humiliation and confusion, and still carried a spark of light. Clara understood now that her own courage was inseparable from her daughter's, a symbiotic truth. To protect, to fight, to act with integrity. These were not just choices but inheritances, lessons woven into the very fabric of who they were together. A bird called from a distant tree, the sound clear and insistent. Clara listened, letting it anchor her to the present. The storm had passed, but its lessons lingered, like a shadow tracing the edges of dawn. She realized that endings are never absolute. Closure is a feeling, a breathing space between what was and what will be. What she had faced, what she had uncovered, would echo. But so would her courage, her determination, and the love that had fueled every action. She thought about the teller, too, who had once seemed so small yet wielded such quiet cruelty. The woman's humiliation was now exposed, yes, but Clara felt no triumphal satisfaction, only clarity. Cruelty leaves marks, but exposure, accountability, and reflection offer a chance for transformation. Not all lessons arrive with comfort, and not all consequences require vengeance. Clara turned her gaze skyward. The clouds, once heavy and oppressive, had parted, revealing patches of pale blue and the first hesitant rays of sun. She thought about the vastness of life, the unseen currents that move through cities, through institutions, through hearts. The fight she had waged was her own, intimate and urgent, but it existed within a far larger framework, one that would continue whether she stood back or pressed forward. In that moment of quiet, she understood something essential. Courage, justice, and love are not always about the spectacular revelation of truth, the dramatic unmasking of villainy, or the applause of society. Sometimes they are about the quiet decision to step forward, to bear witness, to act in accordance with the principles one holds dear, even when unseen, even when uncelebrated. Clara exhaled slowly, the rhythm of her breath synchronizing with the gentle heartbeat of the city. She felt a lightness she had not known in weeks, a combination of relief, understanding, and purpose. She knew that life would resume its ordinary pace, that challenges would arise, and that corruption, indifference, and cruelty would continue to exist in myriad forms. Yet she also knew that her choices, and the courage of those who act with integrity, create ripples that cannot be erased. As she walked back toward the streets, toward home and Emily, she carried with her the quiet certainty that the world is vast, complex, and imperfect, but that each act of courage, each decision to speak truth, leaves a mark. The city shimmered in dawn's early light, ordinary yet extraordinary, alive with countless stories, each threaded with the potential for change. And in the stillness of the moment, Clara asked herself, not as a challenge, not as a lesson, but as a quiet reflection, how often do we let fear dictate our choices, and how might the world change if more of us, in our own small ways, decided to step forward, even when the outcome is uncertain? She paused at the corner of the block, looking back once, the rising sun catching the edges of buildings and street lamps, a subtle glow that seemed to promise continuity and hope. A final thought drifted into her mind, soft and persistent, like the echo of rain on the pavement. Some storms are meant to pass, but the strength we gather in their wake lasts far longer than the storm itself. Clara turned finally and walked on, footsteps slow but purposeful. The city stretched before her, infinite and alive, and she carried within her the knowledge that courage, love, and truth are threads that endure, quietly shaping the world, one choice at a time. The sun rose fully now, the rain forgotten, leaving streets glistening with possibility. And Clara Harrington, her heart steady and her resolve unshaken, stepped into the light, carrying the storm's lessons, the weight of experience, and the unshakable belief that even in the smallest actions there is power to change the world.